So, what we are seeing is the long lasting effects of slavery throughout the systemic structure of this world, basically. This is no different than the long lasting legacy of the Great Migration of history. How Southern landowners tried to restrict the Great Migration of black people. The Great Migration was one of the largest movements of black people in the United States history. Approximately 6 million black people moved from the American South to northern, midwestern, and western states, roughly from 1910 until the 1970s. The driving force behind the mass movement was to escape racial violence, pursue economic and educational opportunities, and obtain freedom from the oppression of the Jim Crow era. The Great Migration is often broken down into two phases coinciding with the participation and effects of the United States in both world wars. The first Great Migration in 1910 to 1940 had black Southerners relocate to northern and midwestern cities, including Washington, D.C., Omaha, Knoxville, Tennessee, Elaine, Arkansas, Memphis, New York, Chicago, Detroit, and Pittsburgh. When the war effort ramped up in 1917, more able bodied white men were sent off to Europe to fight, leaving their industrial jobs vacant. Remember, I said labor camp plantations. They need the people to cooperate to exist. If the people collectively just say no, their whole system faults and falls apart. Camps. The labor supply was further strained with the decline in immigration from Europe and standing bans on peoples of color from other parts of the world. All of this afforded the opportunity for a black population to be the labor and supply in the non agricultural industries. Although the migrants found better jobs and fled, they still fled the South that was entrenched in the Jim Crow era, which was basically the law of the land. While the Ku Klux Klan had been officially dissolved in 1869, the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, continued underground. After that, intimidation, violence, and even lynchings still occurred of black Southerners. The blacks were, you know, basically treated inhumane, unjust, and basically murdered, lynched, um, because of the fact that even though the Klan was banned, they still operated as if they were not. Um, Basically, this wasn't uncommon practice in the Jim Crow era. So, many African Americans faced injustice and difficulties after migrating. Uh, the Red Summer was the migration in 1919. It was rooted in tensions and prejudice that arose from white people having to adjust to demographic changes in their local communities, meaning change through the fact of the process of racism. Basically, the thought that they would have to coexist with an inferior race in their eyes, you know, in their eyes only. All people are human beings, you know. From World War One, it was estimated that about 2 million black people left the South for other parts of the country. World War II brought an expansion to the nation's defense industry, and many more jobs for African Americans in the locals, again encouraging a massive migration that was active until the 70s. During this time, more people moved north and further west to California's major cities, including Oakland, Los Angeles, San Francisco, as well as Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington. Within 20 years of World War II, a further 3 million black people migrated throughout the United States. Black people who migrated during the second phase of the Great Migration were met with housing discrimination, as well as localities had started to implement restrictive covenants and redlining, which created segregated neighborhoods, but also served as a foundation for the existing racial disparities and wealth in the United States. Records and the United States records on this topic covered migratory information and captured various branches and agencies um, of the government, including employment and housing. There are also records reflecting cultural and social aspects of the lives of those who participated and were impacted by the Great Migration, meaning, um, you know, the Great Migration uh, didn't just affect black people, it also affected non black people of color that didn't stand for the cause. People of color need to start having conversations about anti blackness in our communities simply because the slavery that is still today and the racial discrimination that black people have endured in the past and in the present day continue to endure will basically spill over, meaning the cup will run over sooner than later, basically sooner than you think, and the reality will be slavery of all people, all nationalities, not just, people of color. Um, so, you know, basically, government ideas and ideology of the New World Order will be one world order of Babylonian man. I guess if you're white, you feel all right, but even if you have, any aspiration to keep freedoms alive and continue to have freedom of choice, freedom of voice, and constitutional rights of your own choice to have a voice and live as an individual with the right to choose to live your life how you feel appropriate, for you and your family, then you need to think twice. You know what I mean? Because in reality's terms, um, it's like the conditions of racial segregation in the United States is just like the Jim Crow era. You know, um, Jim Crow laws of basically lynching and restrictions of laws will be for all in the United States. And the inhumane and unjust treatment will be to all human beings, not just of color, but to all. The outcome of the demographic shift across the United States of America will not improve, and the conditions for African Americans, which is what we see today, has been futile in terms of a fight from the past to now, will be not just a fight for people of color, but it will be a fight for all Americans as well as all people throughout the nation who do not comply.